people need to be motivated. They need to know that their creativity, there's a place for it. And just like somebody did for me.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. Today, I'm with Love Hunter, and this is going to be a really unique and interesting episode. Love, thanks so much for coming on today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. It's the Made in America podcast, Love. So we start off with the same two questions.
Yes, sir.
What do you make, and why do you make it?
So I make mechanical watches, and these are made by hand in old Swiss and American traditions. And I do it because I've always been fascinated with mechanical things. And I was always taking things apart. And that and my fascination with time, it came together. And
Bada bing, bada boom. Here we are, Love Hunter watches. So I think we got a lot to cover. I'm really excited to get into it. I mean, of all the manufacturers we've talked to over the last almost 5 years, there's been nobody that I think does what you're doing, the way that you do it. And so I'm really excited to get into the detail of it. I mean, it's old school craftsmanship, manufacturing the way they used to do it, but making something really, really beautiful and unique and high value. Anyway, we could get to all that. But it's always really interesting to me to maybe go back with, let's start by explaining what exactly you make a little bit more, and then let's go back in history. So you said you make mechanical watches. So
Correct.
So I'm wearing an iWatch or Apple Watch, whatever they call it. Tell me the difference between like this type of watch and what you make.
So every watch has a power source. Your power source is a rechargeable battery. You plug it in, you put it on that little platform, and it charges it. A mechanical watch is driven for the most part by a spring. And that spring is either wound or the energy is gotten from just the movement of your wrist. So mechanical watches are watches that are spring driven. And
the spring can either, so like you said, like the old days, you'd see the guy with the pocket watch and he has to take it out and wind it up. And now you're saying they've got the ones that sort of re-spin.
They can just by the motion of your wrist.
And so which one do your watches do?
I'm actually making the traditional, the mechanical wind, the manual wind.
So you got to pull it out, wind that bad boy up.
Yeah. Well, you can wind it right while it's on your wrist.
Right.
And then it should store power for several days.
God, I just got to remember to rewind that thing. So like the watches that you make, they're bespoke. Each watch is unique.
It is. And when you're making something by hand, it's almost impossible to duplicate the same thing. So every watch will just have a slight change, a slight difference.
And just to put the audience on notice, if someone, after they hear this episode, many people I'm sure are going to want a Love Hunter watch. What kind of price tag does a Love Hunter watch come with?
So for the titanium model, they're $35,000, and for the all gold model, they're $70,000.
Right. So these are definitely bespoke, high quality stuff. So we got to get into a lot of what is a $35,000, $70,000 watch. But let's go back to what you talked about your passion to getting into this. So what is it? How long have you enjoyed taking things apart? Like what your fascination with time? Like how did this all come about?
So my family is really big into music. So when I was young, I'm 4 or 5 years old, and my father puts on a record player. And the idea, if you have this final thing, and then you have this needle that reads this. It's like it was like magic.
Yeah, that's
and
fair.
So I would of course, I would listen to the music, but the most fascinating thing for me was just watching the needle move across the vinyl. And so it was always, why do things work like this? How do they work like that? And so my mind, I think, from a very young age, was always trying to figure out, how is this made? And it just kind of solidified as me being fascinated with watches.
Did you immediately sort of start working in watch area? Like how did you even get involved in this sort of watchmaking?
So it was just, I think my uncle, he gave me a watch when I was in second grade, and it was a calculator watch from Casio.
I had that watch.
Which, now these are collectible watches.
Yeah.
So I think that was my first watch. And so I always had this fascination after that. And then with all of the things that I used to take apart and never put back together, and my father had these books around the house about time, about the solar systems. It was just all kind of embedded in me. And as a teenager, I found out, this is watchmaking. This is what this is.
But I mean, just even the possibility of thinking that you could make a watch seems like kind of crazy, right? I mean, I actually had that Casio calculator watch, you know, it never would have even occurred to me to think about how to take that apart and build it. And then you're connecting that with the solar system?
Yeah, because every time is based on a constant. And so we were able to, well, time itself is based on a constant. Like the first way that we could tell time was the sundials. So that we knew by that shadow being pressed upon this little shape that we would be able to track time. So we need something that's constant. And the only thing that we know that is constant every day is the sun, the moon, the stars. And so that was our way of first being able to tell time.
And therefore your fascination with time linked to astronomy?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think we had talked previously before. It was like my first book, and I was supposed to read a lot of books in high school, but I didn't. But the first book I ever read was a book about the Hubble Space Telescope, Visions of Heaven. Because I was blown away at the images that were sent back from this telescope, and utilizing just old technology, sextants and things like that, we navigated the oceans. And we've been navigating the oceans for thousands of years. So we needed something constant, and it's space.
In space. And so then you've got this big fascination with, like, I mean, really the endless open expanse of space and universe, which is just enough to like occupy your mind for an entire lifetime, just trying to contemplate all that. But yet somehow that all translates into like a little item that fits on your wrist.
And that was one of the fascinating things. And it's a few marks, a few landmarks that really changed the course of my life. And I was working at McDonald's, and my father knew I loved watches. So he was like, you should work at Tiffany's. And I was like, Dad, you can't go from McDonald's to Tiffany's. It doesn't work. And somehow he got me to go, and I got an interview, and I got the job. And Tiffany's has watches that sell for $500,000. And the watch salesman shows me a watch, and he goes, there's a wheel in here that turns once every 4 years. And it was just like my brain exploded, that we can actually slow down the turning of a wheel that much. And I think that was just it. I had to learn it.
That was the moment.
Yeah, it was like, I have to learn why it does that.
Why this thing? It's like, now we're back to, it says like, this is like the adult version of the vinyl record player, right? It's like, did you just tell me that there's a wheel that we've developed that only turns once in every 4 years? Right? Which means it didn't just do nothing and then turn.
No.
It's been moving at such a slow pace.
And I was so fascinated by that.
Wow. So I assume that Tiffany's didn't want you to just open that watch up and start taking it back apart.
No. That was a really special one.
Yeah. I figured that's not happening. So did you stay at Tiffany's for a long time?
I stayed at Tiffany's for a year. And then I worked for a company called Tourneau, which I think is called Boucher now. And I was there for 6 years. And that was my total immersion into...
What was the company called?
It was called Tourneau.
Tourneau?
Yeah, they're in New York on Madison Avenue. I mean, if you go down there, they got a whole bunch of clocks around.
Okay.
And that really...
was that also a retail, like a watch store?
It was a watch retailer, and they also had some jewelry. But they had watches like G-Shocks, like Swatch watches for like $40. And then they had watches that were $1 million. So I was...
$1 million?
$1 million. So
for a watch?
Yes.
That you put on your wrist?
Yes.
Get out of here.
No.
All right.
And so I was able to be immersed in the entire watch industry, from the lower end to the stuff that's just unimaginable.
And so, and that just further cemented your passion for watches and time?
Yes.
But that's, listen, a lot of us are passionate about things. I mean, a lot of us look at something and go, wow, I wonder how that works. But that's a far cry from going, well, now I'm actually going to start making it.
So I don't know why. I think my father described me best when I was like, Dad, I really like this. I'm passionate about this. He was like, no, you're obsessed. So I think in order to reach, there has to be some, there has to be a push. And I try to communicate this to my friends, to my students. There has to be something that really drives you if you want to be great at that. It has to be something. You have to be willing to give something up. And me, I was just giving up my time.
Mm-hmm. So how do you go from, getting obsessed, so you sort of understand that you want to know how things work. Mm-hmm. You sort of connect that with time. Now you get to the point where you're seeing sort of this time in action in these watches. And now I'm seeing it come together with like the obsession with making things and precision and interest. And now that's merging with time, but you're still only like at the end of the line, right at the retail, sort of selling it out into the customer base. But how do you get from that to making watches?
So I was fortunate that I was a really good salesperson.
Okay.
And one of the perks of being a good salesperson in that company, which at that point was the biggest watch company in the country.
Biggest by volume, you're saying?
By volume, by the amount of watches that they offered.
What's the most expensive watch you ever sold?
So it was only about 50,000.
Okay.
But my coworkers were selling watches for $500,000. So it's just the client.
Got it.
So, and some
Does
of
the $50,000 watch sell itself, love, or you got to sell it?
No, there's a romance to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got to sort of build up the explanation.
Yeah, and I learned from an old guy. I think he was Jewish. He was like 70 years old, and he used to tell me I had shtick.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so I learned
shtick.
a lot of my salesmanship from him, and he gave me a lot of jewels.
So when you're talking to somebody about a $50,000 watch or a $100,000 watch, how do you build the romance?
It's the same, and one of the ways that he told me is like they come into the store, they ask for something, and he says before you show them a watch, you build a story. So by the time you get to that watch, the interest is already there, and so that's what I would do.
It's like, give me an example of like a story that you might build.
It's just like I would tell them this specific watch, the history of it, why they designed it, who it was made for, this specific prince wore it at this specific event, and it just draws people in. And it was funny, like one of the best pieces of advice I got was from a horrible salesperson, and he said, you just have to build stories.
Build stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen, someone I learned from a long time ago said, facts tell, but stories sell.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. So, all right, so you're a great salesman. That gets back on track. And how does that translate into manufacturing?
Because of that, I was able to get a trip to Switzerland.
Okay.
That was one of the perks of being the number one sales for this specific brand, and it was Breitling. And so they had this contest, and I won, and they sent me to Switzerland, first class,
Ooh.
first time out of the country. I was born in Harlem, so just imagine I was born in Harlem, and then my first trip out of the country is to Switzerland. So my life has just been like that. And so when I went there, it was amazing to actually see the factories, to see these people putting these components together, to see the assembly line of how it starts and how it ends. That was just, it was great for me.
Blew your mind.
Yeah, it was great.
Like now we're like second or third lifetime mind explosion.
Because it's theory.
Yeah.
Like you hear about it, but then when you're there and you see it, it helped me a lot.
So, I mean, at that point you see it, now you're starting to understand what happens. Mm-hmm. Did you come back and go to work for a watchmaker? Like,
I took that trip in February of 2003. I was in watchmaking school August of 2003.
Really?
Yes.
Bang.
Yeah.
Where is watchmaking school?
So it's in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. There's a company called Rolex. I don't know if you heard of them.
Rolex, yes, I think I've
So
heard
they
of them.
built a school in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, and I was able to get into that school.
Small school?
Yeah, 12 students a year.
A year.
Yeah.
And so when you go in, what's like the coursework like? How long do you have to go to class? Like
So it's 11 months straight, 8 hours a day.
A day.
A day.
Whoa.
And just to give you an idea of how intense it was, you couldn't fail any tests. If you failed any test, they asked you to leave the program. Immediately.
One strike, you're done.
That's it. And they demanded extraordinarily high quality work. And I always thought that I was behind because most of my classmates, if not all of them, they were sons of watchmakers or nephews of watchmakers. And then towards the middle of the first year, I realized that I was ahead, which was a shock. And then my dad was like, son, you always work better under pressure.
That's it. Performance under pressure is really important. So, I mean, were they teaching you how to use the machines? Like literally what are you?
No, they started from the basics. They gave us a piece of wood.
Wood?
Wood.
Okay.
And they showed us how to file it. That was graded. Then they gave us a piece of brass. Then they gave us a piece of steel. And then they gave us a square piece of brass and told us to file it into a ball.
A square piece and make it a ball.
And make it a ball. And the test was it had to roll straight. So we really learned from the ground up how to use hand tools. And then we learned machining. And then we learned some complicated theory. But they took us from the beginning.
Because, you look at some of these fine watches, and I know we're not going to show it on, but you were gracious enough to show an in progress, a watch today off camera, which is just really amazing. That's all done by hand. Yeah. But some of the tolerances and the precisions and the dials and the gearing, it's unbelievable that a human hand could make it, honestly.
Yeah. And it's just to give you an idea of what it takes to make a watch, the precision on most of the hole locations is 1/100th of a millimeter. So if you would take your hair and split it 4 times, that's the tolerances that we have.
And so there's like a machine that you're operating to do it?
So yes, I operate all of my machines manually, but the watch industry today is all computer programming. So the way I'm doing it is a way that they haven't done it in a very long time.
So most watches today
are done by CNC programming, and then they're hand finished.
Okay. I'm
actually doing it the traditional ways of doing it all by hand.
And the idea is filling this niche market.
It wasn't for that. It's just that's what I love.
So you have, because I asked you off camera a couple of times, and I'll ask you on now, like, what is the future for Love Hunter watches? And I don't hear the traditional business plan, grow in 5 years. Like it's all passion.
So the long-term goal, I'm slowing down on purpose now that I've actually gotten a chance to really start this business. But the long-term goal is to reestablish a watchmaking company like we had before World War II, the Hamilton Watch Company, the Bulliver Watch Company, the Ball Watch Company, which were producing hundreds of thousands of high-grade watches in these old methods. This was before CNC programming. So that's my idea, because these companies no longer exist here. They're all in Switzerland.
And do they make but in Switzerland they do in CNC?
It's all CNC.
Okay.
So the idea is to actually bring back an American company that's doing it in the traditional methods.
And you think there's a market for
I believe so.
Those many watches?
Yeah.
That's amazing. You mentioned teaching, and I just want to know, I'm sort of pivoting it back and forth here, but you do teach too, and I think it's important to talk about that, because you do have an apprentice that works with you.
I do.
So why don't you tell the story? I won't tell it. How that all comes together.
So I started teaching. Actually, it started when I was taking manufacturing classes because I wanted to learn a few more things. And when I was taking the manufacturing class, the teacher was like, "You feel like you know all of this stuff?" And so I was like, "Yeah, I do." And then I took a CNC programming class just to learn all of the different avenues of machining. And when I was taking that class, I was offered a job to teach. So I was like, okay. And so I started teaching maybe 6 weeks later, and I was teaching at Derby High School, teaching them introduction to manufacturing, learning how to read blueprints, learning how to use simple measuring tools. And from that, I found these 5 apprentices that were just amazing.
That's great. Yeah. So, you're still a part-time teacher at Derby High, so just a couple sessions. But and tell me about your apprentice right now. So, because really it's just you and one other.
It's just one now.
Building up these watches. Tell me about your apprentice. Like, how'd you find him, and what does he do?
He's of a rare quality because, again, he's one of my students. But his attention to detail at 17 years old it's unlike what most 17-year-olds are able to do. And the work that we do is demanding. It's not physically demanding, it's mentally demanding. And for him to stay on point, to hate when he makes mistakes, and to work at that level of precision day in and day out is remarkable. And at 17 years old, I was not that guy.
Not many of us were. I wouldn't think so. Yeah, losing patience real quick.
Oh my goodness!
But he's all over it.
Yeah, and he's happy and doing it correctly, and I think that's everything for me.
Is what?
Is being able to have pride in the work that you do. Like they would ask me when I was teaching, they say, "Mr. Love, when you're looking for a worker, what is it that you look for?" And they was like, "Does he have to be skilled?" And I told him, "No, he just has to be motivated. I can teach him skill, but you can't teach a person to really put pride in their work."
That is 1,000% the case. That desire, that drive to learn, to succeed, to complete something really, really well. That you got
That's
that or
everything.
You don't got it. That is everything. And so what's kind of the collaboration between you two on putting these watches together?
So right now he's a watchmaker apprentice. So a lot of what it takes to actually put the watches together, he can't do. He's a phenomenal machinist. Okay. So he makes the parts. He assists me in making a lot of complicated things, and then he watches me as I assemble, to the point that he'll eventually get that, because it takes a little bit to actually put it together.
How many different mediums do you need to be able to work in? Like, looking at the watch, like, I mean, you were telling me before you've got sapphire, you've got titanium, you've got leather. Like, how many different mediums are we working in?
It's a lot. And this is why most watch companies today, they don't do it all. They outsource, for example, the crystals or the leather or the cases or the dials. It's made by different companies. The fact that I'm doing it all, they think I'm nuts, and I might be. Mm-hmm. It's a lot. You need a lot of different skills.
So what do you start with?
So I usually start with a blank of brass. And the reason why it's brass is I want to make sure that I have a functioning watch. Once it's made entirely out of brass and it's functioning, then I move to titanium, because titanium is quite costly.
So the idea is it may not work, and you want to make sure
you want to make sure it works before you start to work in the more finer metals, because I make the gears out of gold for the gold model.
So you're making every watch at least twice.
Well, the idea is to get it right with the brass. That when I go to the titanium and the gold, you can't make any mistakes.
No mistakes allowed.
No. It's too costly.
Yeah. That's amazing. So how does the process work? So how does someone find out about a Love Hunter watch? How do they know that one exists?
So the gentleman that I'm working with now, he is connected with the luxury industry. So a lot of art collectors, a lot of car collectors, he's friends with these guys. And so he's introduced me to a few of these people, and it's very small. For what I'm doing, I don't need social media. I don't need 100,000 hits, because I can only make 15 watches a year.
So the person you're working with finds people that are interested from the space. Mm-hmm. 15 is still a lot of watches, by the way.
It is.
That's a lot of,
and it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, exactly. And then what is there a catalog they get to pick from? Is every watch unique? How does that work?
Every watch is unique, but they're still following us. They should have the same look. It'll just be slight variations. And the client that I was able to host about 2 months ago, he flew in from another part of the country, came to my workshop. I gave him a demonstration, and he loved it, and he bought a watch.
So every watch will be slightly different, mm-hmm. but on the same sort of theme from what you showed me before. So then what would be some of the differences? Like, what would be?
It'll be differences that I can tell. But to the client, if I lined up 10 watches, they would all look the same. It's just when you're doing something over and over, it's just, if the temperature is a little different, sometimes the metal will cut differently. So it's just like slight variations.
So, but there'll be a platinum version and a gold version.
Yes.
And they'll all have the same.
They'll all be measured. If you measured all of the components, they have to measure the same thing, but there'll just be slight variations in aesthetics.
In the aesthetics, that's really going to be the big gap. Will there be men's and women's watches?
There will be ladies' watches. At the moment, I haven't completed the first lady's watch, but yes, it's already designed.
So do you do the designs yourself?
Yes, sir.
By hand?
Yes, sir.
You sketching out all these designs?
I studied architecture drafting when I was in high school.
What haven't you studied, Love?
I don't know.
No, not a medical doctor apparently, but he's like drafting.
Well, I don't work in stones, like diamond cutting and stuff like that. So I don't do that.
Are there any diamonds or stones in the watches?
There will be, and I'm going to learn how to set them.
Get out of town.
I am.
That's your next thing. That's really awesome, Love. I think it's such a really, really cool approach, and such a really, really unique thing.
Thank you.
That you're doing, man. I can't wait to kind of see it continue to go and take off. Your passion is really, really, really amazing.
Thank you.
You've sustained this the whole entire time.
I guess because it's coming from inside.
Yeah.
And I've had some great teachers, and I'm fortunate for that. And that's why I put this energy into me teaching. And I'm not going to stop it, because young people need to be motivated. They need to know that their creativity, there's a place for it. And just like somebody did for me.
Dude, that's the most important thing. And I think, we talked before about the importance of helping the next generation seize the future. And one of the best ways I think to help them be successful is leading by that example, to help them see and feel your passion for something. And maybe they'll have passion for the same thing like your apprentice, but maybe it might spark them to have passion
for something else.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which is just good and which is just as good. Yeah.
We need everything. We need teachers. We need people to develop the next car. So if they can just have that push, that's really all we need.
Man, that's fantastic. Well, listen, I'm going to switch out to some final questions here and we'll put a little wrap on it, all right?
Yes, sir.
Do you have a favorite business book?
I read it a long time ago. I don't remember where it is now. It was called The Management Bible.
I've heard of it.
Right. Yeah. And it just it was like, instead of giving people a raise every time they do something right, it's like give them a thank you note. So it was like those little things that we miss in business. And that book taught me a lot.
Stuff you still put in practice today.
Yes.
There you go. This is going to be an interesting question, but if you had to do something other than make watches, it could be anything in the whole wide world, what would you do?
I'd be an astronaut.
Ooh, actually, you know what? I probably should have pegged that. That's a good one.
I want to go to the moon.
Love, what's something that you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think has helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Probably that family is important. Like I've heard people say that they're self-made. It's actually not possible. You always need someone. And I think that family structure, having people to support you, is everything.
Amen to that, man. My life's proof of that.
Yeah.
What's something that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Love?
We don't have enough time.
Well, you got to pick one. You go back and tell young Love and he listened to you and it make a real big difference in his life. What would you tell him?
It would definitely have to do with my high school math teacher who discouraged me. And because of that, I sort of gave up on pushing myself in math. I would have told myself to just keep going.
Just keep going. Yeah. Don't listen to other people. Follow your inner voice.
Because he didn't understand my creativity. And because I didn't do it his way, it was like he kind of shut me down. And it actually hurt me for a very long time. So it would be that.
But you managed to get around it.
Yeah, I could have done better.
Yeah, well, hindsight 2020. Love, it's been really, really awesome hearing about what you're doing. Thank you so much for showing me the watch.
Of course.
Thank you for what you do. Look forward to following you in the future.
Thank you, Ari.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by Compass MSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.